So in this video, we're going to kick off talking about the Iron Age with a discussion of the peoples of Canaan that emerge once the Bronze Age powers have gone away. So the Iron Age, one of the things that's important about the Iron Age is the shift that it creates in technology, the shift that it creates in economy. Basically, bronze creates a more complex economy because it requires control over more distant resources. It requires control of supplies of copper and tin because it has a complicated process of manufacture, because it is more expensive to produce and therefore requires a greater volume of output in order to overcome the costs. And this is why the Bronze Age manufacturing empires, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the Assyrians, and the Egyptians, the Bronze Age powers all end up ramping up their economies, trying to create an economy of volume that ultimately overcomes them, ultimately overbalances their agricultural base. The footprint for iron is dramatically different. Iron ore is very common. It is widely available. And so access to the raw materials is much simpler than for bronze. It's not it's still a complicated process to produce bronze tools, but this has the effect of, once you are an iron power, this sets you up at a level above all of your neighbors who are not. As a result, because you can produce it in much greater quantities, the standard of living for an iron power tends to go up. The iron powers tend to have better tools and better weapons, which means that they can use these tools to produce more in terms of agricultural output and defend their property better. So this means that the people of iron powers are eating better, living longer, they have a higher standard of living, and their populations tend to increase and become more wealthy. And so this means that there's a wider opportunity to become strong and viable in the Iron Age. There's a lot more access for nations and city-states to become prominent, and this means a lot more players in the international marketplace around the Mediterranean, compared to the Bronze Age, where only the greats are important. So here's a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about in general in the Iron Age, starting with in Egypt. Interestingly enough, in Egypt, there's not a lot to talk about. The greatness of the Egyptians lies in the Bronze Age. During the Iron Age, relatively little happens for the Egyptians. They don't rise up as a power in and of themselves. The Egyptians, not because they are not doing well, on the contrary, the Egyptians during this period are relatively complacent. They are not trying to create great empires. Rather, they are falling back on the natural wealth that comes to them from the Nile and from all the wealth that they've accumulated. The Egyptians are occasionally ruled over by other peoples, but the Egyptian culture is so strong that even external rulers tend to leave Egypt more or less alone. This is true for the Persians, who conquer Egypt under the successor to Cyrus in the middle of the Iron Age. Egypt is taken from the Persians by Alexander, and Ptolemaic Egypt is established there. A Macedonian kingdom ruled over by one of the generals of Alexander and his descendants, and this persists all the way down to the famous foreign pharaoh Cleopatra VII, who ends up being the last of the the pharaohs of Egypt before Egypt becomes a Roman territory. But the point is that Egypt persists as a culture, as a nation, as a focus, and isn't attempting to become an international player during this period. In Mesopotamia, there is a succession of empires that are leveraging the natural base that Mesopotamia provides. And interestingly enough, we'll be talking about them later. They serve as examples for how to different ways of creating an empire. So starting with the Neo-Assyrians, who establish a brutal and repressive regime. The Assyrians are eventually overthrown by the people that they are attempting to repress, including the Chaldeans of Babylon, and Babylon emerges as a dominant power in a much more cultural and economic sense. And then these, in turn, the entire region succumbs to the Persians, who establish an entirely different kind of much more stable empire. The Persians, as we'll see later, are the most stable, the strongest, and achieve a new level of how to run an empire. Mesopotamia is later ruled over by the successors of Alexander the Great, who conquers the Persians and all this territory. That begins the Seleucid Empire, again, one of the generals of Alexander, and that persists down into Roman times. In Canaan, I mentioned before that one of the things about Canaan is that it's constantly being fought over by neighboring empires. And so usually, during the Bronze Age, Canaan is being contested by the Egyptians and the Hittites and the Assyrians. And so it's only with the collapse of all the Bronze Age empires that powers and strong cultures can emerge in Canaan. And so we get the Phoenicians, the great traders, the Philistines, who establish an Indo-European presence of city-states in Canaan, and the Hebrews, who return from Egypt and from their enslavement in Egypt and establish very briefly a great and powerful kingdom. One of the things about the Phoenicians is that they establish an elaborate series of trade routes throughout the Mediterranean, and as a part of this, they establish colonies and trading posts. One of these colonies becomes one of the most powerful and wealthy cities of the Western Mediterranean. That's Carthage, and Carthage will eventually emerge as the great nemesis for the Romans later on in the Iron Age. In the Aegean, so we see the collapse of the Mycenaean Empire, along with all of the other Bronze Age powers, and then for several centuries we have what's known as the Greek Dark Age. The Greeks emerged from this into the Archaic period, in which we find that all of the key elements of Greek culture that we know from later periods are already fully established. That the Dark Age is a period of growth and fertility that we can't see because during this time the Greeks have lost the technology of writing. Then in the West, in Italy, we see the emergence for the first time of powers during the Iron Age. The Etruscans are already there. They're the original inhabitants of northern Italy, and they establish a culture of wealthy and strong city-states in what is now Tuscany. The Romans are, again, Indo-European migrants, a part of a wave of Indo-Europeans migrating into Italy, and at first like in the Aegean and like in Anatolia and Persia, the Indo-Europeans come in and see the wealth and happiness of the peoples that are living there and emulate them and take on elements of their economy and culture and politics and eventually overtake them. And so this is again happening with the Etruscans. The Etruscans eventually are overtaken by their Indo-European newcomers, the Latins, amongst whom the strongest are the Romans. In Canaan, so Canaan is the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, what is now Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and the thing to bear in mind is so the Canaanites, the Semitic inhabitants of Canaan, includes the Phoenicians. There are also various other Canaanites that are encountered by the peoples that arrive there from outside. The first series of arrivers at the beginning of the Iron Age is the Philistines. These are Indo-Europeans who migrate into Canaan from the Aegean as refugees from the collapse of the Bronze Age Aegean. And so the Philistines set up a carve out in warfare with the inhabitants and with the Egyptians who are controlling southern Canaan at the end of the Bronze Age. The Philistines carve out a little nation for themselves, a series of city-states in southern Canaan, and they remain outsiders, surrounded by Semitic peoples. They remain aliens who are scarcely understood, who seem to have a culture, an appreciation, an aesthetic that is so opaque to their neighbors that they seem to have no culture at all. And this is one of the reasons why the Canaanites and the Hebrews, when they arrive, hate the Philistines. The Philistines are a constant presence as an enemy, and they are very strong and wealthy because, unlike the most of the rest of Canaan, they brought their ability to use iron with them. They established themselves as an iron power in the midst of Semitic Canaan, and as a result, they are wealthy and strong and well defended. And the Canaanites never see them as otherwise as outsiders who shouldn't be there. Into the middle of this come the Hebrew refugees from Egypt, and so with the Philistines established on the coast of southern Canaan, and the Phoenicians established in great and wealthy cities on the northern coast of Canaan, including Tyre and Sidon, the Hebrews at first have no place to go except the wastelands in between the cities of the Canaanites. And later on, we'll talk about how the Hebrews have to fight to establish themselves as a people as well as a state. As a result, we have different kinds of people in Canaan. We have the Indo-European migrants, the Philistines, who are always outsiders. And then we have the Semitic peoples, the Arameans, who come in to Canaan from the north, from the Fertile Crescent. We have the Phoenicians, who are living in northern Canaan, what is now Lebanon, and the Israelites, the Hebrews that established the nations of Israel and Judah over a series of stages from the beginning of the Iron Age. The Philistines, as I said, first have to fight the Egyptians in order to take over southern Canaan, take it away from the Egyptian Empire. The The Egyptians didn't know who they were. They referred to them in their records as the sea peoples, as outsiders that come into the the fringes of the northern marches of the Egyptian Empire from the sea, and the fighting is so fierce between the Egyptians and the Sea Peoples that this is one of the things. This is happening at a time of crisis for the Egyptians already, as the entire Bronze Age economy is collapsing. That this is one of the things. This war with the Sea Peoples is one of the things that destabilizes New Kingdom Egypt and brings about its collapse. And so this is the actual carving that the previous slide represented a sketching of. As a result of the calamity of this, the Egyptians actually refer to it as the period of calamities, in which all of these things, the most dangerous catalyst of which was the war with the Sea Peoples, in which the Sea Peoples took away the northeastern frontier of the Egyptian Empire in southern Canaan, and was part of a series of destabilizing factors for the Egyptians. The Phoenicians are an entirely different kind of animal. The Phoenicians have a great deal of natural advantage. They have access to a number of different kinds of luxury materials, including outstanding marble and cedar woods. As we know, cedar is the most prized form of wood, and a special kind of dye that is only available in northern Canaan. And the Phoenicians developed this outstanding business model in which they leverage the gifts of their natural resources. They build up, instead of selling these expensive things that they have, they develop a outstanding proficiency in the working of materials in order to produce luxury goods that are crafted by human hands, that are 10 times more valuable than the raw materials themselves. The Phoenicians become extremely famous throughout the Mediterranean world through the traders that leave from the extremely wealthy cities of the Phoenicians and go out into the sea for long journeys, 2 or 3 years at a time, in which they engage in trade with hundreds of local communities in the kinds of goods that simply cannot be acquired from anyone else. And as a result, this entrepreneurial model, based on highly skilled exploitation of a wealth of raw materials, makes the Phoenicians the leading traders in the world. And as a result, they're able to build these wonderful cities and to acquire a reputation for their engineering, for their skills in working with marble and stone, and they are called upon by all sorts of other communities to help to build lavish temples and amazing palaces and to decorate great buildings with works of magnificence. And the Phoenicians end up exerting a great deal of influence throughout the Mediterranean by establishing contact with all of these different peoples. They help to make connections between all sorts of isolated communities. And this is one of the reasons why the purple that is available from the murex snail, the dye that comes from this unique this unique resource of the Phoenicians becomes the the chief means of designation of nobility and royalty throughout the Mediterranean world. This purple is a luxury good available from no one else except Phoenician traders, and so textiles in which this dye has been used, especially elaborately produced and designed textiles become the visible means by which all sorts of peoples, especially the Romans and the Etruscans, set themselves apart between the people at the top of society that wear luxury goods and people that do not. The other great influence of the Phoenicians, of course, is that they developed the first phonetic alphabet, which we've already talked about, and this means that the Phoenicians, spread throughout the Mediterranean, especially in the Aegean world, where they made contact with the Greeks, and in Italy, where they are trading with the Etruscans. They spread literacy. They provide, because of the portability of a phonetic alphabet, this invention of the Phoenicians. They provide a number of peoples with their first access to literacy, this first leg up into urban technological civilization. The influence of the Aramaeans is also important. The Aramaeans are a large group of Semitic peoples that moves into Syria early on in the Iron Age and starts to spread widely through Mesopotamia and Canaan and the whole Fertile Crescent region, the surrounding areas. And so the thing about this is, because wherever you go in this part of the world, you encounter populations of Aramaeans, because Aramaeans settle everywhere and amongst all of these other peoples. Aramaic starts to become a presence as a language in all of these areas, and a lot of people pick up Aramaic as a second language. And so as a result, everywhere you go, Aramaic is present. This means that if you know Aramaic, you can travel from place to place and be able to communicate, at least with the Aramaic inhabitants. And this fosters the spread of Aramaic itself as a second language all throughout the Middle East, all throughout Southwest Asia. And Aramaic becomes this useful, lingua franca. It becomes this useful way of connecting and communicating between all of these disparate and unconnected peoples. Aramaic becomes the common language in places like Canaan. So by the end of the Iron Age, people are speaking Aramaic as a matter of course in Canaan and in Mesopotamia and Persia, even if they're not Aramaic. The populations of New Testament places, of Galilee, Nazareth, and so forth, these people speak Aramaic. Jesus spoke in Aramaic. Before that, Aramaic was the common language, the official common language of the Persian Empire, because it was a means of connecting together all of these different peoples. And so, as a result, the Aramaeans, even though they don't make a huge wave as a focused Semitic people the way that the Phoenicians do, for example. Their language becomes a means of tying together all the different kinds of peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean world, and we'll see some of the impacts of that going forward as we go along, and that's that.